Well, good day, my friends. We are in Las Vegas today, starting at the Las Vegas sign, the famous neon sign that everyone comes to see. Don't worry, we won't be spending much time here. We're in Vegas today, and we're going to be going and visiting the grave of a man who made his home here in Vegas and taught us all about the lifestyles of the rich and famous. Daze with Jordan the Lion begins now. We couldn't come to Las Vegas and not put the sign on at least once, right, honey?
Exactly. We always have so much fun in Vegas. It's great to be back.
Yeah, and we're gonna go visit the grave of Robin Leach, who made his last days, lived out his last decade here in town, and is buried here with a lot of famous other people like Red Foxx and Tony Curtis. So let's go.
Let's do it.
It is a balmy 100 plus today. We are at Palm Eastern Cemetery where Robin Leach is having his eternal champagne wishes and caviar dreams. Been here before, and I've visited Red Foxx and Tony Curtis before, but never Robin Leach. He has a really nice headstone from what I could see online. Looks like he's right over here close to the water by this building over here. So we ended up parking right over here. That's where it pretty much stops. And he's over on this side of the lake. Locals. So he has a very nice eternal resting place over here. And once you find it, you can see that he definitely gets some visitors, leaving him champagne. We knew him from Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, but actually got started when he was 14 years old. He was editing his school paper, and then by the age of 15 he was editing for a local paper, making £6 a week, and then got a full-time job when he was 18. Out of there, eventually immigrated to the United States, where he was on TV shows like with Regis Philbin and Entertainment Tonight, things like that, and ended up being one of the editors for The Star. Back when there was the National Enquirer and The Star, he would write and edit for those, and those were basically gossip. Famous, especially in the 80s and before. It was the supermarket gossip columns in the end, and he saw how people were taken with this and came up with the idea for a show that he would parlay into 3 separate shows that he was running the production on. It's pretty amazing. He would basically run with a very small crew. He would organize with celebrities to get intimate access into their homes, their possessions. He said he never really could understand why people agreed to do it, other than maybe his charm, but he said he always promised to never show them in a bad light, and he just knew that people like to watch interesting and rich people. He said nobody's gonna watch a show called Lifestyles of the Boring and Uninteresting. So he said he would love to open the doors and walk in and show someone a $60,000 carpet and give people this dream of, you know, different lifestyles. He would not only show their home and their belongings, but he would actually go hang out with them. He would party with them. He'd go on yachts. He'd get drunk. Katie and I were watching some old clips. We were laughing because in one of them he's like holding the lady that was on the show, and she's pouring a stiletto heel of champagne into his mouth, and he's totally hammered. He's having fun, and it kind of dawned on me, I'd really never noticed it, but what I loved about Anthony Bourdain and No Reservations was a lot of what I loved about what Robin Leach did, because he would take a minimal crew, go off on this adventure, genuinely have fun, genuinely meet likable people and share it with you, and then he would go into a studio later and with his own unique style of humor would narrate over top and add an enthusiasm a lot of times that would really bring the show to life. And that's what a lot of people loved about Robin, was that wonderful voice of his. Even though he immigrated to the United States, he never lost his accent. Being raised outside of London, he always had that really proper accent. And one of the things we were talking about, Katie and I were talking about on our way here, was how many times, even though he had 3 shows, and he would say that he produced all of those shows, so they would, he would never check a bag. He was always running, like he was filming one show one day, another show another day. When they were traveling, since he was picking up the expense, he would try and film multiple shows, and whoever he filmed, he would use snippets in multiple shows. But we were laughing because so many times he ended up being cast on a show just playing himself as, you know, Robin Leach of the Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous.
Absolutely. He became synonymous with everything in wealth. So he popped up in movies like She-Devil with Meryl Streep going through her house. He was also had a really great part in Troop Beverly Hills talking to Pia Zadora, and he was narrating a fashion show. So it's really crazy to think that there would be no...
WrestleMania. He was out
exactly.
debuting the new title at WrestleMania. He was always on things, and then eventually would do other shows. He would host like reality shows, and then at the end of his life, he was living in Las Vegas and was actually doing a show out here. And sadly, he ended up passing away out here. He had a stroke in 2017, in November of 2017. In August of 2018, he ended up having another stroke while he was in hospice and passed away. But you know, you would think because he ran those 3 shows and those were his babies and he incurred all the costs, people would ask him, are you now one of the lifestyle of the rich and famous? And he would tell people, no, because I think people that make 50 million are really the rich people. But he would say, I'll know I really made it when I filmed my last show and I'm the subject of my last show. But it was great because he could get people, like really famous people, Elizabeth Taylor, Sophia Loren, he could get them inside their house showing their why they bought something or what their favorite things were or experiences they had there, and would genuinely, like he said, I would never film their house in anything other than a good light. So he said if it rained, they wouldn't film. If the flowers weren't blooming or they didn't look nice, he wouldn't film. He really wanted people to see the good life. And I think now it's kind of interesting how he took something, a very early version of kind of a reality TV and what it's turned into today. But there's even a Robin Leach Boulevard here in Las Vegas. They have memorialized him here. He also had a penthouse in Manhattan, but he never ever was the subject of his own shows. His show lasted from 1984 to 1995. Kitty, do you remember he also did, they did like a, maybe this is like too young for you, but 1993, Foxx did an expose documentary on Madonna, and Robin Leach was the host, and it was like a live documentary, and he had a cell phone number that he had given to Madonna and asked her to call in and talk about anything that wasn't true. And that was like the topic of the show. I like watched it live, and she never called, but do you remember that?
No, that's crazy.
Yeah. One of those back in the day when Madonna was, everybody wanted to know about what Madonna was up to. She was living her most risque life at the time. Katie, I just found something that we're gonna have to watch now. I didn't realize he was on Celebrity Wife Swap.
Oh my god.
He swapped with Eric Roberts. I would be very fascinated to see what that was like, what their two lifestyles were like.
Absolutely, we'll have to find that.
I do love, like I said when we first got here, that there's always, it looks like, some champagne bottles out here right in front. Obviously he's getting visitors. I also mentioned that Tony Curtis is buried here in Red Fox, so we'll go visit them now. I suspect Vegas is going to start having a lot more celebrities buried here because so many people have moved out here in the last couple of years. Musicians and celebrities. Here is Tony Curtis's grave. He has that horseshoe cross above it. What was his real name, Katie? Do you know?
Wasn't it Bernard Schwartzman or something?
Yeah,
like
Bernie
that?
Schwartz. Tony Curtis. And they have his ranch that he lived out his days on. Do a lot of his painting with Shiloh. So I believe that was the reference there. Big inspiration to Elvis acting. He has a nice peaceful grave here with some bottles of alcohol, some little figurines of horses. It's a little hard to read what it says on his headstone, but Katie, what did you read that he was buried with when he passed away?
It was really fascinating. He was buried with a Stetson hat, his favorite Armani scarf, driving gloves, his iPhone, 7 packets of Splenda, which I would love to know the story about.
Coffee.
Otherwise, he also was buried with his favorite novel, Anthony Adverse, which actually partially, it inspired his name, Tony Curtis.
Wow. I believe they did eventually sell his ranch, but his widow lived there for a while afterward. Father of Jamie Lee Curtis. Of course, one of my favorite movies, I think a lot of people's favorite movie, is Some Like It Hot. First time we would see someone so good. Tony Curtis basically portraying Cary Grant and Jack Lemmon, both of them getting themselves into a pickle where they had to portray women and then end up getting caught up in a double life. It is easily one of the greatest comedies of all time. Billy Wilder and Marilyn Monroe, filmed out at Hotel del Coronado. But he was legendary. I mean, the guy won several awards, was in some of the greatest movies of all time, Spartacus.
Avid painter as well.
We're staying with Todd Fisher, and Katie just reminded me that I have at one point made a video when I came out to visit Tony once before. If you want to see it, go look up Tony Curtis's grave. Todd Fisher, the son of Debbie Reynolds and brother of Carrie Fisher, telling a story of how when he hung out with Tony Curtis offered to basically be his pot dealer and said like, hey, anytime you need it, you come get it from me. And Todd was like, our stuff was way better than Tony's, so we just gave him our stuff. And we're like, no, Tony, when you need something, you come to us. I was reminded, I was telling Katie on the way here, I finished Michael Richards' new book, the guy who played Kramer, and he talks about an inside joke that he and Jerry had. One night they were leaving a restaurant and Tony Curtis was sitting in a booth and called him over. And Jerry was like, I don't really want to go over there. And Michael Richards was like, are you kidding me? That's Tony Curtis. He's royalty, Jerry. We got to go over there. Jerry goes, no, I think he just wants to be on the show. And Michael Richards goes, of course he does, Jerry, but why wouldn't you want Tony Curtis to be on the show? He's like, oh, he's going to want too much money. So he says they go over and start talking to Tony Curtis, and he starts asking them if they have girlfriends, and they said no. And he goes, oh, you're those kind of boys, huh? He goes, oh, I'll make a phone call for you kind of boys. And he goes, Tony leaves the table, comes back, and he goes, hey, I just talked to Hefner. We're all going out to the Playboy Mansion. And Jerry's like, I don't really want to go to the Playboy Mansion. Michael Richards like, are you kidding? It's Tony Curtis. We have to. So that became a running joke that anytime they would be writing a part that they thought was interesting or unique, Michael Richards would always look at Jerry and say, Tony Curtis, call Tony Curtis. So then eventually they did call Tony, and I believe he did want $50,000, and Jerry said, no, we can get somebody else for that. And then they ended up hiring Lloyd Bridges for that role instead. But they said that for the rest of their lives, even to this day, when something like grand happens, he'll look at Jerry or call Jerry and just say, Tony Curtis. And I love that he has tons of fans. You can see he's got flowers. He had is that 6 wives or 5 marriages or 6 marriages with just as many kids. And Jamie Lee Curtis just recently did a nice homage to him, and you can see with the coins and the stones and everything, people come out and visit him pretty often. So now we're going to go out and visit the great Red Fox, also known as Fred G. Sanford. Kind of located out here by the road. One of my favorites. I love this guy. From the earliest time I can remember, TBS was always showing Sanford & Son reruns, and I watched them all. I loved it. Still do. Here he is with a red fox on his headstone. The great Red Fox. He was a fantastic comedian. He has a very interesting life. I've done vlogs on Red before. I won't go into it, you know, real heavy, but his best friend was Malcolm X. Malcolm Little, before Malcolm X was on the political side, before we knew him that way. He and Red were super tight, and Red was on the Chitlin circuit, was discovered there, was doing Vegas, was a mainstay here. That guy was making like 20 grand in cash a night. You can see this is his production company logo, and you can see there's an R and an F in the face for Red Fox. But where he really broke out was, there was an English TV show called Steptoe & Son, and Norman Lear was going to make an American version, and Red Fox was the star of that show. He was beloved. I mean, the guy was unbelievably funny. His timing, he was nowhere near the age that they portrayed him on the show, but he immediately made the show a hit. And he thought, and he was probably not wrong, he felt that because of the great ratings, he deserved more money. And when he went to the producers, Norman Lear and his partners, they just said, we can't give you that money, Red. He said, you can. If I were white, I would get that money. So he left the show, and it was his leaving the show that forced them to basically put Grady into his spot, and everybody loved Grady. See, I guess they did a show where it was based around Grady, and that was the last show before Red took off, and they got really good ratings. So when Red left, they said, well, let's just see how we can do with Grady. And Grady was so good that he held the show for a while until Red came back, and then they ended up giving Grady his own show. But he would end up doing several spin-offs of his character, Sanford Arms, and then ended up at the end of his life, he had not ever paid taxes. You hear interviews with people that worked for him or were friends with him. He'd give everybody he knew cash, no questions asked, never asked to be paid back. But for decades, he never paid his taxes, and never told his friends that he never paid his taxes. So instead of getting a helping hand when the government came screaming for their money, he didn't ask his friends like Eddie Murphy for help, and the government came and seized all of his belongings. Eddie Murphy would put him in Harlem Nights, help him make some money, and then eventually he had a show at the end of his life called The Royal Family. Him and Della Reese. And the producers of this show, for some reason, liked to work Red up. They knew how to press his buttons, and they were doing things that they knew he didn't want to do. They got him so mad one day that he eventually ended up collapsing on set and had a heart attack and ended up dying at the hospital. It was really sad because someone on the set said as they were wheeling Red off, those same producers were saying, well, we're gonna have to rewrite the script and work around this, so callously. But he was loved, and his last home is still here in town. It's like a insurance office or something like that, and I went and visited it in another video, so if you want to see that, look up Red Fox Grave on my channel. And that was the one that, if you were around in the early 90s when he passed, a magician bought that house and claimed that it was haunted with Red's ghost. God, what a legend. Katie, were you a Sanford & Son fan?
Oh yeah, absolutely. This was actually making me think when we went to the Hammergren mansion, you found the car from Sanford and Son. Do you remember?
So Red, when the government, the IRS seized his property, he had a Model T, and it had his name and it had his face on the spare tire and it had his name on the license plate and everything. And it was sold at auction. And when I went to the Hammergren mansion, they let me into the mansion. As they toured me around, there was his Model T sitting there with the spare tire cover and everything. I couldn't believe it. Nice to come out and always visit Red when I'm in town. And Katie, you were mentioning to me you had Red, and I did know this, but you know, at the time of Red's death, he didn't have much money, and it was a celebrity that stepped forward and paid for his headstone.
Yep,
his funeral.
Eddie Murphy paid for all of this,
yep.
Which is a nice nod, because I'm sure if you asked anyone connected to Red, he was kind to a fault. Even when he was on hard times of his own, he would always help out people. So it's good to know that there were people out there who really cared for him as well.
Yeah, God bless you, Eddie Murphy. And on that note, we're gonna call it a day. Thank you all for watching. Have a great night from Las Vegas, Nevada. Goodbye.